Not even a week after publishing what is probably the most consequential bad review in recent gaming history, a review that crashed Pearl Abyss's stock 40%, that was substantially written about things patched away in 72 hours, that 3 million people ignored with their own money, IGN just published another Crimson Desert piece. And this time, they called the developers naive designers. I want you to sit with that for a second before we go any further. Naive designers. The studio that spent 8 years building one of the most technically complex, visually extraordinary, seamlessly handcrafted open worlds this medium has ever produced. Naive designers. Written with complete confidence by someone who has never written a line of code, never designed a single game system, never taken one creative risk in the medium they've spent their career evaluating. Someone whose entire professional existence, whose platform, whose audience, whose institutional power exists precisely because Pearl Abyss did the hard work, and 3 million people wanted to experience it. Without the studio's building and us consuming, there is no IGN. There is no platform. There is no Metacritic score. There is no institutional authority. The whole apparatus is entirely downstream of the thing it's condescending about. And they called those developers naive. So I want to ask the question nobody at IGN seems to have asked before publishing this. What exactly is this confidence built on? Because 20 years ago, sure. 20 years ago, IGN served a real and legitimate function. You couldn't watch 40 hours of gameplay on YouTube before buying. You couldn't pull up a Twitch stream of someone 200 hours deep in a game. You couldn't read 10,000 Steam reviews from actual players who bought it with their own money. The information gap was real. The institutional access was real. Review copies, preview events, publishing infrastructure, the ability to reach millions before anyone else could. The authority had a genuine foundation, and it earned its place in this ecosystem. But what is that foundation in 2026? YouTube exists, Twitch exists, Steam exists. The entire information monopoly that justified 20 years of institutional authority has been completely democratized. The gap that made IGN necessary is long gone. And here's what gets me on a personal level, gamer to gamer. Every game referenced in this article, Cyberpunk, Elden Ring, Valheim, Red Dead Redemption. I've played all of them, thousands of hours across most of them. So have most of you. So have the 3 million people who bought Crimson Desert. We experienced everything he experienced. We know everything he knows. We've lived in every world he's drawing on to make his comparisons. There is no enlightenment the badge confers. No insight invisible to us that becomes visible to him by virtue of working at IGN. No asymmetrical information. No technical expertise. No game development experience. Gamer to gamer. He thinks he's more qualified to evaluate this game than the people who bought it, played it, and loved it. And the 3 million copies, the very positive Steam rating, and the rebounding stock price are 3 independent data sources all saying the same thing at the same time. That's what this video is about. Not just the bad review, we've covered that. Not just the face-saving follow-up piece they just published, though we're going through it in detail. It's about the specific quality of arrogance that makes both of those things possible. The kind that only survives when it goes unchallenged long enough to stop feeling like arrogance and start feeling like authority. Let's go through it. The very first sentence of this article is, "Love it or hate it, there's no denying that Crimson Desert has suffered something of a rocky launch." Rocky launch. 2 million copies sold on day one. I played on launch day and had a blast. The only thing rocky about this launch was legacy gaming media manufacturing informational chaos and calling it criticism. And I want you to notice what was in the original review and what wasn't. Controls, inventory management, boss difficulty. Every complaint was about surface-level friction, the kind of stuff any competent studio patches away in the first week. Pearl Abyss did it in 72 hours. What was never in the review? The artistic vision. The sheer technical achievement of a seamless open world at that scale and beauty. The genuinely original design philosophy. None of the things that will still matter about this game in 10 years registered. Just the surface. Just the stuff that was gone before the review was even cold. And now look at what this follow-up piece is actually doing. Everything that dominated the original review, the controls, the inventory, the boss difficulty, has been patched away. So the rocky launch framing has quietly shifted to the one thing patches can't touch. The story. That's what's left. That's the last redoubt. We've covered extensively in previous essays why that argument falls apart the moment you actually engage with what this game is trying to do. And we'll get into it again. But I want you to see the sleight of hand clearly first. One patch cycle invalidated the overwhelming majority of their professional criticism. And rather than acknowledge that, they reframed it. Rocky launch. Still standing, still confident. As if the ground beneath them hasn't completely shifted. Then we get to the paragraph that made me stop reading and just stare at my screen for a moment. It's unclear if the development team has had to break their backs to do this. Think about what you have to believe about yourself to write that sentence. Pearl Abyss, a studio whose stock crashed partly because of a review substantially written about things they then fixed in 3 days, came back, listened, worked, and turned the entire conversation around in under a week. And the response is to wonder, in print, whether they had to work hard to do it. That's not neutral. That's a power move dressed up as a throwaway clause. It's the kind of sentence that lets you condescend to someone while maintaining complete plausible deniability about having done it. And then, assuming that's true, it would also mean that Pearl Abyss didn't see the glaring issues in Crimson Desert's design, be that a result of poor internal testing, naive designers, or simply not seeing the wood for the trees. Naive designers. What technical background, what engineering expertise, what game development experience sits behind the confidence required to call the people who built this naive? The answer, as far as anyone can establish, is a media degree. That's it. That's the foundation. Something happens in the middle of this article that I think is the most revealing moment in the whole piece. After walking through the patches and grudgingly acknowledging that they worked, fast travel improved, storage box transformed the crafting loop, boss difficulty adjusted, they write this sentence. If you already like Crimson Desert's approach, I think there's a genuine possibility that it could be a contender for your Game of the Year by the summer. Your Game of the Year. Not the Game of the Year. Yours. As in, for people like you. People with your particular taste. People who enjoy this kind of thing. Read that again and feel exactly how much condescension is packed into one word. They didn't correct the 6. They didn't reconsider. They just graciously extended permission for a certain type of player to enjoy a certain type of game. The hierarchy is completely intact. The authority never moved. They're still above it. They're just acknowledging that some people, with some tastes, might find value here. First, they condescended the developers, naive designers. Now they're condescending the players, the very people their entire existence depends on. Written with complete confidence and zero self-awareness that without us, none of this exists. They complained, in the review and again here, that having to prepare for bosses was a design failure. Cooking food, managing resources, grinding to get ready for a difficult fight. Too much of a burden. Punishing. And honestly, I had to laugh. Because the preparation in this game isn't a separate grind you stop and do. It's just what happens when you're actually playing. You're exploring, picking up ores naturally, buying mats from NPCs on the road, upgrading gear organically. By the time you reach a boss, you have more than enough if you've been engaging with the world at all. The reviewer made it sound like he had to stop everything and dedicate hours to farming. That's not the game. That's someone who didn't understand how the systems work together, describing his own confusion as a design failure. And this person called himself a hardcore Souls player. But here's what makes this particularly pointed. Pearl Abyss listened anyway. They nerfed the bosses. They fixed the inventory. They added the storage. They responded with extraordinary speed and genuine care. And IGN is still standing by the 6. Because institutional arrogance doesn't update when reality pushes back. It just keeps going. Still certain, still confident, still writing think pieces about whether the patches were enough rather than asking whether the review was. And then we get to the part that I think most completely exposes the limits of how these outlets actually think about games. Their argument is that Crimson Desert's story is a fundamental creative failure. Not technical, not a launch window issue, but baked into the bones. And to explain why, they invoke Cyberpunk 2077. I've played thousands of hours of Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is a cinematic experience first, and an open world second. That's the design philosophy, held completely and executed brilliantly. Every decision serves that vision. When you're in a Cyberpunk cutscene, you're not being taken out of the game. You're in the deepest part of it. That conviction produced one of the greatest games ever made. Crimson Desert has a completely different conviction. And here's the thing IGN cannot grasp. That difference is not a deficiency. It's a design philosophy. A deliberate, ambitious attempt to do something Western open-world design stopped trying to do years ago. Let me tell you what I was doing while this article was being written. I found out there was an armor set somewhere in the world. The Shadow's plate armor. Full Lich King aesthetic, hood up, black robes, massive executioner axe. Nobody sent me to get it. No quest marker, no objective, no waypoint. I just heard it existed and decided I wanted it. What followed was genuinely one of the best gaming sessions I've had in years. I rode out with just a direction. Scaled mountains that looked like the Canadian Rockies, genuinely vertical. The kind of climb where you grip the controller tighter because you're not sure you'll make it. Stumbled into a witch's hideout built inside an ancient tree trunk in the Wayward Woods. Found it completely by accident because I'd gone the wrong way. Accidentally rode through a black bear camp and got chased halfway up a mountain by what felt like an entire civilization of absolutely furious barbarians. Dropped into desert canyons with waterfalls hidden inside them. Found border cities that weren't on any map I'd looked at. Still on Chapter 4. Main story untouched for hours. Nothing locked me out. The world just existed, vast and alive, and completely indifferent to whether I was following the plot. That's mediocrity? That's what I'm supposed to endure to get to the good stuff. And then they compare this to Starfield. Starfield is procedurally generated emptiness connected by loading screens. Crimson Desert is a handcrafted world you traverse seamlessly on horseback for hours, watching biomes change around you in real time. Putting them in the same sentence isn't analysis. It's proof the framework has broken down so completely, it's producing conclusions that make no sense to anyone who has actually spent real time in both worlds. And then there is this line, the one that I keep coming back to. To unlock Crimson Desert's more accomplished facets, you have to dedicate hours to mediocrity. Think about what made World of Warcraft legendary. Not the endgame, not the raids. Riding through Elwyn Forest for the first time with no idea where you were going, in a world that felt like it had been there long before you arrived, and would continue long after you logged off. Think about what made Skyrim legendary. Not the main quest, but the feeling that over that mountain there might be something worth finding, and the world making good on that promise often enough that you kept going. Neither of those games opened with their most accomplished moments. They opened with a world and trusted you to find it. That trust was the entire point. Crimson Desert is doing something much closer to what the great MMOs understood. That in a world this big and this alive, heavy narrative doesn't deepen immersion, it works against it. Every cutscene that locks you into a specific emotional experience reminds you you're watching someone else's story rather than living in your own. The short, well-animated story beats give you just enough context to feel the weight of the world of Pywell, without taking that weight out of your hands. By Chapter 4, Cliff's journey had already given me enough to feel genuinely invested. Not because the writing is flawless, but because the world around it is real enough that even an imperfect story lands differently than it would in a smaller space. That's not mediocrity. That's a design philosophy that requires a different vocabulary to evaluate than the one IGN is working with. And calling it mediocrity, with that confidence from that position, is the arrogance made completely visible. The vocabulary doesn't exist in their framework, and rather than acknowledge that the framework might be the problem, they call the thing the framework can't evaluate mediocre. So here's the question this whole article forces me to ask, and I think it's the most important one we've raised in this entire series. What is IGN's arrogance actually built on? Because arrogance with a foundation is at least coherent. A surgeon with thousands of successful operations can be confident. An engineer whose bridge is still standing can be confident. Even a critic with a long track record of being demonstrably right can earn institutional confidence. The arrogance has something underneath it. What's underneath IGN's? We've played every game they reference. We've lived in Cyberpunk, Elden Ring, Valheim, Skyrim, World of Warcraft. We know exactly what they're drawing on, and we can evaluate those comparisons as well as they can, probably better, because most of us have spent significantly more time in these worlds than any reviewer on a deadline ever could. There is no expertise gap. There is no insider knowledge. There is no technical foundation. What they have is institutional capital. 20 years of accumulated authority that went unchallenged long enough to start feeling like competence. The IGN badge doesn't come with expertise. It comes with a Metacritic score that moves stock prices. And for 20 years, that's been enough to crash valuations, shape what gets greenlit, call Korean developers naive, completely certain of its own authority. And gamers are not an easy crowd. We are the most cynical, hardest to please, most forensically critical audience in entertainment. We tear games apart for a bad frame rate. We spend hours in forums dissecting single quest design decisions. When we defend a studio rather than tear it apart, that means something. It means the studio passed a test that very few pass. 3 million of us independently decided, with our own money, that Crimson Desert was worth it. That's not a mob. That's a verdict from the hardest audience in entertainment. And the data makes the institutional failure undeniable. 3 million copies despite the review. Steam going very positive, in direct contradiction of the critical consensus. And most tellingly, the stock recovering. Because even institutional money is now recalibrating. The market itself is figuring out what gamers already knew. That IGN's verdict on Crimson Desert told you more about IGN's framework than it did about Crimson Desert. The one thing they were supposed to do they failed at completely. And the market is learning to price that failure in. That's the collapse of institutional trust made visible in data. And their response is this article. Not an apology, not a reconsideration. A face-saving piece written with the same unbroken confidence as always. Because the arrogance only survives in the absence of accountability. So let me leave you with a question I've been sitting with since I read this piece. If IGN doesn't represent us, the gamers, and they don't make games, and the information gap that once justified their existence is long gone, and the YouTubers covering these same games have larger audiences, more hours played, more skin in the game, and are held accountable by their communities in real time, what exactly is justifying their existence in 2026? What are they actually for? I don't have a clean answer yet, but we'll explore it properly in a future video. What I do know is that the fact the question is even worth asking tells you everything about where we are. That's it from me. But before I go, once again, thank you. To everyone who showed up for this one, the comments, the shares, the support. It means everything, and it keeps this going. And genuine thank you to Enjoy GM, a longtime partner who has supported this channel through thick and thin. If you're playing Where Winds Meet, Wuthering Waves, Genshin Impact, or any other gacha, Enjoy GM lets you top up at better rates than you'd normally get. No account login required, nothing sensitive shared. You enter your UID, pick your amount, pay, and you're done. Link is in the description. Community Discord and everything else is down there too. Until the next one, peace.